We live in an urban age, right? The future is rapidly becoming more and more urban. But what is the story of change in our rapidly urbanizing world? Today, I'd like to tell you how I see that story of change unfolding by taking you to a few cities that I've been immersing myself in and researching over the last few years. Now, it's a fascinating story, really, and one that I think is best told through the use of metaphor, that of improv cities. So the first step to learning the story of rapid urban change better is to unlearn what we think we already know about cities. Okay? That is to shed our preconceived notions. So if you're like many of my students, you've probably seen the film Slumdog Millionaire by director Danny Boyle, right? And there's a scene in that film that epitomizes how the third world city is often stereotyped and portrayed to the rest of the world, and that is the shit dive scene. So apologies for being graphic, but let me narrate the scene. So 7-year-old Jamal Malik, the slum-dwelling protagonist of the film, is taking a blissful dump. I was trying to think of a ladylike word, but I couldn't. So a blissful dump on one of the few toilets of the slum in which he lives, the Mumbai slum in which he lives. His brother, Salim, waits impatiently outside. Suddenly, you hear the sound of a loud helicopter in the sky, right? And it belongs to none other than the Bollywood megastar, Amitabh Bachchan, who has decided to drop in on his fans. Now, Salim, the brother waiting outside, gets really impatient, blocks the door from the outside to teach his brother a lesson, and runs off to catch a glimpse at this actor. Jamal, meanwhile, stuck inside, is desperate to get to his hero, realizes he's stuck inside, and does the unthinkable. He takes a dive into the vat of human excrement below him, somehow manages to grope his way out, and runs, covered from head to toe in human waste, towards the gathering crowd and secures his hero's signature. Now, if there's a sense of gritty entrepreneurialism that characterizes slum dogs like Jamal, there's also something that left me a bit uncomfortable about the film. Now, don't get me wrong, I actually really enjoyed the film, especially its pulsating music. If you know anything about me, you know that I love to dance. But something that I found uncomfortable was the depiction of the poor as not only inhabiting a wasteland, but as sort of morphing into and becoming that waste themselves. They are the detritus that the globalizing city of Mumbai has left behind, and the only way out is to somehow manage to get on the TV show How to Be a Millionaire, which is, of course, what the film is about. I'm not saying that slums don't exist, okay? Of course, areas with very poor infrastructure and very poor housing exist. In fact, areas called slums, as you can see in the foreground of this picture, existed not so long ago in this city, not so far away from here. But too often, the slum is portrayed as an area of anarchy and decay, okay, overrun by violence, without compassion, where everyone is out to get everyone else, and the state is either entirely absent or entirely evil. So, in this great drama of global urbanization, ordinary people are acting out their lives to the best of their ability, often with whatever means they have at hand, and often in response to the enormous constraints placed on their lives. And as I've been researching cities around the world, hearing people's stories, watching street politics in action, and mapping the history of neighborhoods, I've realized that it's really important to think about the narratives we use to construct cities. People everywhere around the world, I've seen, despite the oppressive conditions that they may have inherited, are managing to find places of flexibility. They are, in other words, improvising. I found that this metaphor of improv cities, or improvisational cities, does a lot of justice to what happens on the ground. So what do I mean by this metaphor I've coined of improv cities? Well, let me explain. So you may be familiar with improv theater, right? Improvisational theater. It's a form of live theater in which the actors create the story as they tell it, as and when they tell it. There are no ground rules necessarily, or there are a few ground rules, but there's no actual script, right? And so the script is sort of made up as they go. What makes this theatrical method work? Well, the first rule of improv is to say, yes, and that is to build on and respond to the actions and investments and words of your other actors, to offer openings rather than closures. Similarly, in these improv cities around the world, as I want to call them, a whole host of actors, from residents to utility engineers to urban planners to politicians to all types of actors on the urban stage, are responding to and building on each other's actions and words, ultimately not towards a future spawned by a clear-cut plan, but rather a future that's unfolding more organically and based on iterative back and forth actions. Okay? It's really crucial that we see this and that we try to think of an alternative vocabulary for understanding this rapid process of change around the world. So what I would like to do is anchor this metaphor of improv cities in two cities that I've had the chance to research ethnographically over the last few years. The first is Bangalore in southern India, and the second is Dakar in Senegal, West Africa. But before I do this, let me give you some global statistics. So currently, the United Nations estimates that 3.7 billion people live in cities around the world. Over the next 40 years, that is in most of our lifetimes, we will add a further 2.6 billion people to cities. So that makes us about 70% urban by 2050. Okay, that's a lot more mind-boggling than this number we keep repeating that we're 50% urban today. 70% urban over the next 40 years. Now, most of this growth is happening in the so-called global south, right? South America, Africa, South and Southeast Asia. 60% of the yet-to-come urban areas, the majority of which will be in the global south, has not even been built yet. It has not even been built yet. So most of the future urban growth is going to happen at the urban periphery, those areas on the outskirts of cities. Okay? And again, this is a process of urban change that looks very different from the history of cities around the world. Already, the United Nations estimates that some 3 million people are being added to cities every month on the outskirts. And here they are improvising their livelihoods, they're improvising their jobs, they're improvising their infrastructure, their homes, okay? The urban outskirts, the urban periphery is where land is available, life is affordable, and the law flexible and negotiable. Take the example of Bangalore in southern India. Okay, this is a city that I'm grown familiar with, not only because of familial roots here, but also because of a long-term research project in this city. As the darker green areas on this map shows, almost all the population growth over the last decade, some 2 million people have been added, making the population roughly 8 million today. Almost all of this new population growth has been absorbed by the urban peripheries, okay? Much, much faster rate of growth on the outskirts of the cities than in the central parts. And this is repeating itself in numerous cities around the world, from Jakarta to Rio to Cape Town to Mumbai. Okay, these are the cities of the future, and this is what it looks like. This is where the future of our global urbanizing planet lies. And there's nowhere better to understand this metaphor of improvisation at the urban periphery. So, in Bangalore, I interviewed over 100 different actors who are involved in building out the city in different ways. Okay, and I pieced together this story of urban change. And this is something of what it looks like. So imagine the outskirts of the city, where land is much more available and affordable. And what might first happen is a fly-by-night developer will buy a piece of land from a rural landowner on the outskirts of the city, right? And the land will technically be zoned for agricultural land use rather than urban land use. But what happens is this fly-by-night developer does things a little bit shady and sells this land to eager buyers, eager lower income or even middle class buyers. And the city has become a huge destination for job seekers. So there's a lot of demand for housing that is not met by the formal housing or planning entities of the city. So these buyers move in, despite the fact that there's no infrastructure in these areas. But this is where the improvisational process kicks in, okay? This is the yes, and the buyer moves in and may set up a local resident association, a resident or neighborhood association, and might eventually start to, demand attention from a local municipal entity, who will then put in a few roads and start connecting this outskirts area to the utility networks and to the rest of the city, okay? In turn, the residents here start getting more and more politically engaged, okay, lobbying the officials a little bit more. And eventually, the city or the city's periphery might get included within the larger boundaries of the city, only to reveal a larger periphery. So this way, the process of improvisation continues, okay? The periphery keeps getting built out. Now, some of this might be slum-like development, but most of it is actually just neighborhood development in the way that you and I think of this term, right? This is what these neighborhoods look like. This is what sort of the future of our urbanizing planet looked like, and it looks quite a bit different from how cities have developed historically. Okay, this is a really important point here. Now, this view of the improvisational process is a pragmatic view, okay, not a utopian one. On the upside, such urbanization has lifted some people out of poverty, providing them access to healthcare, to education, to upward mobility. But on the downside, sharp inequities persist, and environmental challenges have deepened. Okay? So water access gets more competitive and contaminated, and even the most modest of monsoonal rainfalls can actually jeopardize people's safety and security. And this improvisational process is not universally embraced by everyone. Right? It can also be an avenue for exploitation. And it's not a sort of celebration necessarily of the ingenuity of the urban poor, but it's just a sort of pragmatic look at how the process of urbanization is unfolding, what that story of change looks like. But I do think that this metaphor of improv cities and this sometimes chaotic process can give us an idea of how urban change is actually happening, especially if it enables urban planning to be more flexible and responsive to ground realities. And I do believe that this idea of improv cities, okay, allows us to think about the numerous ways in which ordinary people who contribute their sweat, their creativity, and their work find a means to establish the right to urban life, or the right to the city. So let me give you two examples of how this process of establishing a right to urban life actually transpires. So a few years ago, I found myself in Dakar, Senegal, where I was on a human rights fellowship, hurtling towards the outskirts of Dakar in this vehicle, known as a car rapide. And the vehicle was playing loud Bollywood music, which was quite surreal to me. And it's quite amazing how the Senegalese love Indian music and Bollywood music and can sing the lyrics despite not understanding the words. So this was sort of improvised public transit and improvised urban culture at its most vivid. Now, once I reached the outskirts of Dakar, I met with an organization called Fondation Droit à la Ville, or Foundation for the Right to the City. And these are pictures of people building out their homes at the outskirts of Dakar with the help of this organization. And what the organization has done is that it's improvised new protocols that allow people's self-construction and their investment in their housing and their infrastructure to serve as proof of their right to be there. Okay, so they've worked with the government in order to do this. And so the government, realizing that people will move to cities, whether you like it or not, rather than evicting these people who have moved here, have decided to improvise, beyond the plan of the city, beyond the policy documents, and have found a way to make it possible for people who want to live in cities to actually live there. My second example comes from Bangalore again. And this is the sort of improvised street politics at its best. Okay? So as I was walking around a peripheral neighborhood in southern Bangalore, I came across this scene of people having a meeting in the street. Okay, and this is a great picture because you can see the sort of the yet-to-come city in the background being built out, and so that's the materiality, and in the foreground you can see the politics in action. And they were having a meeting about the state of water access in the city. And so this woman whose back is turned to us, and her hand up, is hurling insults at this municipal official who doesn't look too pleased, but is nevertheless listening to her hurling insults. His assistant is diligently taking notes by the side. That is the role he's playing. He has to look like he's very busy and officious. Meanwhile, the character on stage left is an activist who's trying to suppress a smile because of the colorful insults that she's hurling at the official. And so is the lady on stage right, also trying to suppress a smile. This is the performativity of street politics. This is the improvisation. Something meaningful will come out of meetings like this, and something meaningful does, as I document in my research. So my argument is that improv is the new normal mode of urbanization. Okay? It is the new normal mode of the way cities are getting built. And we have to know where to look for meaningful change. We have to know where this type of improvisation happens. And I guarantee you, meaningful change doesn't take place in perfectly scripted plans and documents and maps. It often lies outside of those perfect scripts and plans and maps. It often lies in everyday improvised acts. So in closing, I hope that this metaphor of improv cities gives us a way to think more powerfully and hopefully about our urban future. So how will we crack this future? Will we stay in our comfort zones worrying that the future isn't planned enough? Or will we step outside of those comfort zones, accepting in a moment of rupture that sometimes maps, plans, policies, and scripts can and should change, and that this has made all the difference, not just in the global South, but everywhere. Thank you.